Hey there, YouTube. If you haven't been 110% plugged into every development in the saga of the Sig P320, it may not surprise you to learn that things have come to light you may not be aware of. There are a lot of disparate sources, and combining them all together into one cohesive whole takes a lot of work. So this video will help explain what is known and what isn't known. I want to start off by saying that all of these sources are worth digging into in deeper detail, and for legal reasons, just assume I'm saying the word allegedly roughly every 6 or 7 words. I will link all the videos referenced as well as the YouTube channels of the creators in the description. This is meant to be a summary with some connecting tissue uniting the whole so you can understand the big picture. Despite what Sig may publicly claim about the P320, it relies on exactly 2 things to not go off, and the trigger isn't one of them. The first thing the P320 relies on is the Sear. It is important to note that unlike a Glock or even a 1911, there is no feature or device that blocks movement of the Sear when the trigger is not pressed to the rear. It is floating on 2 coil springs. These 2 coil springs, and by way of geometry, pressure from the striker spring, are the only thing holding the Sear in place. The second thing that the P320 relies on is the safety lock, more commonly referred to as the striker safety or striker safety lever, which is held in place with a torsion spring. So in order for a Sig P320 to discharge without a trigger pull, both the Sear and striker lock must move, and those things are only prevented from moving by spring force. Let's start with the alleged striker safety lever failure modes. I will now play a portion of this excellent video by Focus Trip.
The firing pin safety. That part was designed to be stamped. Someone in finance was like, hey, let's save like $30 per pistol. So a bunch of parts that were designed to be stamped end up becoming mimmed, which includes that striker safety.
So what's the difference between stamping and mimmed in terms of safety and quality?
With mimming, once in a while, you might run into bubbles in the safety lever. If the bubbles break, then you have a problem where it shears off, the striker goes forwards. With safety levers in particular, if there's a wear issue, the striker goes forwards and the safety lever saves you a few times. There's a possibility that it'll break after a few instances of it happening. Out of the box, if you have a good one, the pistol should be safe, which is why the majority of 320s haven't gone off. But if you have a bad one out of the factory, or if you drop it too many times, then you might have a problem.
So you think it's a parts issue, that certain mimmed firing pin safes are not up to snuff, and then they cause the gun to go off at random?
Yes and no. For that to happen, you also have to have a Sear issue.
So there were questionable choices made regarding the design of the striker safety lever, allegedly. At this point, I want to thank YouTuber Protraband for doing the work to FOIA the FBI and obtain these next 2 important pieces of information. The first of which is the FBI Ballistic Research Facility's report on a Michigan State Police P320, see link in description, that discharged in a holster. Quoting from page 29, because of the inherent movement between the slide and frame, a 3rd test of the striker safety lock was conducted. Approximately 50 attempts were made to determine if the striker would impact the prime case after manipulating the weapon while holstered. The weapon was pressed together and pulled apart at the slide and frame. Thereafter, pressure was applied to the frame and the Sear manually released from the primary notch. The intent of the manipulation and pressure was to mimic what might occur to a holstered weapon during an officer's duties, such as running, jumping, climbing, fighting, pressing a weapon against a wall or vehicle, or obtaining a master grip on the pistol prior to drawing, etc. BRF staff observed the prime case fired on 9 attempts, with the primer indent measuring between .019 and .026 of an inch, with an average of .023. While staging one attempt to allow another BRF staff member to observe the striker safety lock function as designed, the weapon was prepared and placed in the holster with no manipulation. A second staff member released the primary Sear notch from the striker, and the prime case fired, indicating failure of the striker safety lock. End quote. The important thing to take away here is that the striker safety in the examined firearm was able to be defeated by simply jostling the P320 in the holster, as would be expected to happen for any firearm carried in the holster throughout the day. The next piece of information uncovered by Protraband is the Supplemental Inspection Criteria document put out by the United States Air Force on July 22nd. The supplemental inspection criteria are detailed as follows, quoting from the bottom of page 2. Field and detail strip pistol to allow inspection and function check of internal assemblies and striker safety lock mechanism. Remove striker assembly. Inspect for proper function, assembly, and for any damage to trigger, sear, striker assembly complete, external safety assembly, captive safety lever, and trigger bar. End quote. So as you may surmise, the Air Force does not trust the striker safety lock either. They also mention specifically to check for proper assembly. So we have good reason to believe that the striker safety design is compromised and ineffective. Anecdotally, I have also heard reports elsewhere that it is sometimes assembled incorrectly from the factory, with one leg of the torsion spring being dislodged. I have also heard anecdotal reports that fouling such as carbon, unburnt powder, and brass shavings can overwhelm the spring, and as a result, the safety lever sticks in the upwards defeated position. My perspective on this is that the design seems to allow for a lot of surface area for fouling to build up, when compared to the typical round plunger design. There does not seem to be a singular problem with this safety lever. Rather, there are allegedly a lot of problems. This video from YouTuber P320s in a trench coat demonstrates what happens if the sear releases and the striker lever is defeated or ineffectual. So why did Sig choose this design? Well, it is very compact and it saves having to cut a pocket in the slide for a striker safety plunger design like Glock, Smith & Wesson, and pretty much every other striker-fired pistol uses. I would think Sig leveraged this compact design when scaling down the P320 to create the P365, where space is at a premium. So if we look at the P365, well, nevertheless, let's move on. The second thing that needs to happen for a P320 to discharge without a trigger pull is that the sear needs to release the striker. Now, you're never going to guess, it looks like there's multiple alleged ways for this to happen as well, and they can combine and get worse just like the striker safety lever issues. First, it seems as though there's the potential for the takedown lever for large frame guns, that is 10mm and 45 ACP, to get mixed up with the takedown lever for small frame guns. Whether this has happened in factory guns has yet to be seen. However, one of the most stalwart defenders of the P320's honor, Gray Guns, has put out a notice stating that this combination of parts can create an unsafe condition. I won't get too into the weeds, but the takedown lever is what allows the P320 to be disassembled without a trigger press, and it does this by lowering the sear via an arm. For whatever reason, Sig designed the large frame and small frame P320 takedown levers to fit interchangeably, but importantly, the large frame takedown lever reduces the sear engagement in the small frame guns when it is in the assembled and ready to fire position. The second way this can allegedly happen is poor surface finishes or geometry of the interface between the striker and sear. Because nothing forces the P320 sear to fully engage in the way that the drop safety slot in a Glock trigger housing forces the Glock trigger bar to fully engage the striker, we are again reliant on spring pressure combined with a bit of geometry. However, should the geometry be off or a poor surface finish or burr be present in the sliding sear surfaces, these parts can get hung up, resulting in reduced sear engagement. The FBI BRF's report of the MSP P320 that discharged in a holster found that one of the sliding sear surfaces had a ledge. And the U.S. Air Force's supplemental inspection criteria released on July 22nd specifically calls out the sear and striker assembly as areas to look for damage. Page 3 of that report, shown here on the left, has a photograph of the sear and advises that the sear notches should be free of burrs and spurs. The third way that the sear and striker engagement can be reduced is by fouling or debris. That's a bigger subject that we're going to get to later because it affects all P320 pistols, whereas the incorrect takedown lever and bad sear surfaces will be limited to select examples of the P320. The important thing to note is that none of these problems are enough on their own to make the sear release the striker uncommanded. I was reminded of the Swiss cheese safety model by Gen Y Revolver Guy on ARFCOM. That final piece of Swiss cheese in this situation, which all of the issues I've covered combine with, is excessive movement between the slide and frame that seems endemic to the P320 platform. In particular, the slide can move up and down relative to the frame, which is enough to shift the Sear engagement, and combined with one or more of the three aforementioned issues of incorrect takedown levers, bad Sear surfaces, or fouling and debris, this can be enough for the Sear to let go of the striker entirely. Allegedly. In these videos from Wyoming Gun Project, the loose slide to frame fit is demonstrated, as well as the ability for that slide movement to release the striker when the striker engagement is reduced. It's important to note that he set his P320 up to have reduced striker engagement by using a screw to pull the trigger to the rear a small amount past the wall in the travel after the take-up. And the take-up also serves to defeat the striker safety lever. So those two issues are simulated here, while the third issue, loose slide to frame fit, is demonstrated.
This tolerance matters in a striker-fired gun. Here's a $200 TSUS, a $189 TSUS PX9 Gen 3 Duty. This one has polymer rails in the back. This particular gun, kind of like an XD in that case. Look how much movement there is. Okay, now look at this. The FBI report said there was a ledge on, it was either the Sear or the striker hook, I don't remember. And you pulled the trigger a little bit and it caught on that ledge. And then you holstered your gun. Okay, this is a G-code holster. Then you holstered your gun and it just went off. And so let's see.
And again, I want to be careful to note that the screw he uses is there to simulate reduced striker engagement from one of the three issues I've noted. And it also defeats the striker safety lever, which we've already covered as being allegedly problematic in the P320 platform. It's not simulating a screw getting stuck in the trigger, it's a static and repeatable simulation of other known issues. So now I want to circle back to the issue of fouling and debris. The design of the P320 seems particularly susceptible to capturing environmental debris between the Sear, slide, and striker. Indeed, these parts all combine to form a pocket, and if the pistol is carried muzzle down in a holster, the bottom of that pocket is a place where fouling and debris can accumulate. We've all cleaned unburned powder and brass shavings out of a semi-auto pistol before, so it's not difficult to imagine it getting into this pocket. Worse, there's a gap between the frame and the slide directly above that pocket through which things from the environment can fall into. If you are a law enforcement officer and you carry a P320, I would advise that you immediately switch from sprinkled donuts to plain donuts. But even then, you aren't safe from brass shavings and unburnt powder. This video from YouTuber Mischief Machine demonstrates that if the area is fouled with unburnt powder and brass shavings, the Sear engagement can be reduced to the point that the slide movement will release the striker. It is important to note that for this experiment, he removed the striker safety lever, simulating a failure of that part while demonstrating a failure of the Sear to retain the striker due to fouling and debris combined with excessive slide movement.
I've basically put some unburnt powder in it to add some extra contaminants. And then I'm using 5 thou shin stock, so it's very, very thin. This is super thin. And this is brass too, it's the same material. But it's like how much, like you should be able to exacerbate the situation and the gun won't go off. So that the shallow shelf on the Sear on the Sig, being it only has 30 thousandths, it's basically got a shelf there for debris to cause this issue to happen.
Once you see the pocket problem, you can't unsee it. There's just nowhere for debris to go. This problem isn't going to be easy to solve. There doesn't seem to be a good reason for the ramp behind the Sear to extend back as far as it does, nor does the ramp really need to exist. Other platforms with similar Sears, such as the M&P, do not seem to have a need for the ramp. My speculation is that Sig just ran out of room here and couldn't help the creation of this pocket that traps debris up, down, left, and right. So when they scaled down the P320 to create the P365, I expect they would have run into the same problem. Well, nevertheless, so I think that tidies up things nicely for this P320 saga. It's pretty obvious what the problems are. The FBI and the US Air Force both seem to be on the same trail, and I honestly don't think SIG has a realistic chance of fixing all the problems. Miraculously, SIG made changes to the P365 when they scaled down the P320 that virtually eliminate all of the problems with the P320 that are just now coming to light 7 years after the P365 was released. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. I think their only option at this point may be bankruptcy, which is why they are pushing so hard with the PR spin to gaslight everyone. One more thing. SIG claimed back in March that, and I quote, lawsuits claiming that the P320 is capable of firing without the trigger being pulled have been dismissed in courtrooms around the country. Well, one of those lawsuits did not get dismissed. This is from July 28th. So there goes that, I guess. Anyway, I hope you found this video allegedly informative, and don't forget to check out the links in the description below to the various creators. We would be in the dark on so much of this if it weren't for these fine people. I also want to bring attention to one video in particular that didn't fit in with the structure of this video, but which does an absolutely spectacular job covering the history with SIG, the P320, and police procurement up to this point. It's a how did we get here type of video, and it's excellent. It's on the YouTube channel of a gentleman named Dick Fairburn, and it's titled Sig P320, An Unfolding Disaster. It's quite long, but trust me when I say you will not want to click off of it. Mr. Fairburn goes into a lot of interesting detail, and I think that video serves as a useful prologue to this one. This video is unmonetized, and I authorize replication in whole or in part with appropriate credits.